Okay.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. We'll open the meeting. We get a roll call. We start that first. Dennis Feeney? Here. Marlene?
Present.
Bill Murphy?
Here.
Anton Dreslin? Anton is out. So Paul Nyland's excused. And Wanda?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Great, thank you, everyone. Let's see here. First item is, do we have a chance to review the minutes for last meeting? And if so, if we get a motion to move the minutes.
Motion.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so moved. Thank you. CFO report. Amy?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'll go over briefly the financials that are in your packet. Starting with the balance sheet, as of April 30th, our cash balance was roughly 4.3 million. Of that is 3.5 million in CDs, which will be maturing over the next few months, July and September, at various rates between 3.16 and 3.5%. Budget versus actuals. Our total revenue year-to-date was 35,000 versus a budget of 150,000. The 150,000 was just fees that we would hope to collect as projects close throughout the year. So hopefully as projects close, that number will be closer to the budgeted amount. Total expenses for the year are 110,000 versus 165,000 budgeted. We're coming in under budget on operating expenses and legal and professional fees. So year-to-date, our net loss is roughly 74,000 versus a budgeted amount of budgeted loss of 15,000.
Very good, thank you. Any questions?
What are the operating expenses that are budgeted?
It was just a plug number to, any expenses that may arise throughout the year,
So kind of like
A cushion.
miscellaneous type
Yep.
of thing?
Yep.
Okay.
which we have had none of so far, so.
Very good. Any other questions for Amy? Thank you. We get a motion to move the financial report? Need a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thanks, Amy. CEO report, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. I'll keep my remarks relatively short. We've got two items for your consideration today. One is the Atlas Copco final application approval and project approval. And secondly, the Altech Steel site, which will require a little bit more discussion from this about the staff recommendation. But with that, let me turn it over to Kevin Catalano, who can just refresh everybody's recollection about what the project has been. And this is a project you approved some time back and was delayed because of some external factors, but is now ready to go. And there's a big ceremony scheduled at the company for June 10th.
Yep, a week from yesterday.
Can you send us an invitation?
I believe did the board get the invitation?
I haven't got the invitation on it from this, but they were setting up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll make sure the board gets set up.
Contact the company, get that out to the
Yep.
board. But so with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin to just refresh everybody's recollection about the project, and then Chris will come in and explain some of the changes that to the project that have happened and necessitated the so-called deviation letter.
So I think it's, thank you, everybody. I think it's important to just start out with two main facts. The size of the addition is not changing. That is staying the same. The number of jobs being created and retained, staying exactly the same. We've gone over it with them several different times. Those are the two big factors. One is the construction of the building was the most expensive part. That is not changing. They're still going to build the same footprint that they were originally approved for through the Voorheesville. They're just cutting back on some ancillary things that can be added later, but the board gave them the approval to move ahead with the planned expansion. Potentially, I think it's, just want to make sure I get the numbers right for everybody. We are looking at 55 additional new jobs in that average salaries in that like $75,000, $85,000 range. And they are going to be able to retain 35. Those 35 would have been lost without this because of competitive pressures. So little ancillary things are being dropped off the budget so they can build out the footprint. They can start producing the product, the large compressors that they're going to use for carbon capture. Those currently are built overseas, shipped, they're built, they're taken apart, they're shipped, they're reassembled, not effective. So what they're going to do is this new high bay expansion will allow for them to build significantly larger compressors here in the United States. So we are grateful that they voted to move ahead with the project. And Kevin and Sandy and Chris and I all talked about, when you go from a $40 million project and you drop the total cost down about 17%, how should we react as an IDA? I'll let Chris take over from here.
Yeah, so just before we do that, so what we asked the applicant to do is submit a revised application. We just wanted to do this for our own personal record keeping. As you know, we're all subject to the rules and regulations of the Authority Budget Office. And 2 years down the road from now, when they come and they start asking Amy, you have a $42 million project here and a $33 million project here, what happened? We'll have this new application right in front of us. So Chris and Hodgson Russ were very active in this. And what we're asking the board to do today is to amend the project along the lines of this revised application, in which we adjusted our incentives also on this. If you may recall, we had two different entities providing incentives to the project. One through this body here, the IDA, the property tax and related benefits. And then we were providing them incentives through our so-called STAGE program, which is a separate county grant program, the Sustainable Technology and Green Energy Program. So we've adjusted both of those incentives back just to reflect the lower project cost. We think that that's prudent, and that's what we're recommending to you today. But Chris, you want to kind of walk everybody through?
Yeah,
some
sure.
details?
Thanks, Kevin. So you'll recall that we sent a deviation notice for this project out back in August 2024. And since we got a new application, the project cost went down from 40 to 32 million approximately. Sales tax exemption went down from 1.625 to 1.375. And real property tax exemption went from 734,000 to 607,000, rough numbers. So because we changed got the new application, we sent a new deviation notice out on Friday. And the gist of that is, and I'll defer to Kevin and Sandy as well, but the big ticket item is because it's a decrease in the project costs, we reduce the incentive, if you will, for the pilot payments going. So they now go from $211,000 a year to $221,550. So the pilot is a little less rich, if you will, in terms of what your property tax exceptions are being provided. So the first resolution is just to approve this as a deviation. So like I said, the deviation notice went out last Friday. You don't have a 30-day period to wait. There's no specific notice period. So that checks the box from a general municipal law standpoint. This resolution approves this as a deviation from your UTEP. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So a deviation, is that, can you maybe explain it, because it's less restrictive, you don't have to go through a process, is that why you went through deviation?
No, if it was, the deviation means you're not giving a pilot that's specified in your uniform tax exemption policy. Because this is kind of a strange one, there's a fixed payment amount for these, there's a fixed payment amount each year for a pilot payment. That's why it's a deviation or that's why we're setting this out.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, as you know, and as we've discussed in the past, we will not do a project that is not supported by the local governments. I personally spoke to both the mayor of Warrensville, Mayor Rich Strout, as well as the town supervisor from Scotland, Doug LaGrange, informed them of this. Not that they would be opposed, because they're actually this would increase the amount of property tax they're getting from this. As we decrease the benefit to the company, it increases the payment to the locality. So they were both, they understood and were supportive. And so we expect this to be without any, issues.
But there'll be a public comment period.
based on the deviation notice?
Yeah.
There's no requirement to have one.
So refresh my memory quick. The last news we had was they were tabling the project, and that was because of their board, I believe. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but what changed, just out of curiosity, as to why it's back on the table?
They always needed it locally. There was an election back in November. They wanted to see how things shaked out.
Sure.
Things shook out. They're ready to move
Wasn't if there
forward.
was another contract or?
Nope.
It was, okay, yep.
Nope, just timing.
First project.
Yeah.
And, you know, the kind of thing where they, they postponed, and then they came back and said, okay, we're ready to go, we need it done by.
Yes, sir.
need it done by
Next week.
16 or something like that. June
So we're gonna look to
So we-
close as
that's-
quick as
again,
possible.
That's what the rush around
Okay.
is for.
So the downsizing is like value engineering the project down by 17%. I mean, the building's the same.
100%.
And the deviation is the deviation from the matrix, our uniform tactics and policy that we went through.
Because we sent notice, somebody sent out a first notice out, deviation notice, and since we're keeping it again, we send a supplement, no deviation notice out for tax. So that's what we do.
Okay.
So I believe that the county executive is going to be at their event next week.
Sarah's been working with Melissa on,
But we'll get an invitation out to all the,
all the board members will have one.
yeah,
First
I'm
thing
not
tomorrow.
available that day, but we'll make sure you get the invitation.
Anybody else have any questions?
What day is that event?
Tuesday.
June 10th, right at the plant.
Okay. We need to make a motion here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we get a motion to approve the project as presented.
Motion.
Can we get a second? All in favor? Opposed? So moved. Great, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Will. It's a great project.
Is that both motions we did there?
No, so the next motion, I'm sorry, the next resolution is the amended approving resolution. This is just to approve going forward with the project with the new terms. If you look at Exhibit A, it has the new, under 4 has the new project costs. Number 5 is the private sector investment, the sales tax exemption. Number 5 is changed. Exhibit A.
Yeah.
You're on 45. There you go. So happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions? Bill? Dennis?
I think it was pretty good explanation. Okay.
Good, right.
Any questions? Can we get a motion to move it?
I'll move it.
Second? Wanda, all in favor? Opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next project?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next project is the Altech Steel site transfer that we're recommending to the board. And with that, I'd like to introduce a couple of our staff people. We've got Clayton Besh, who's head of site development for the company. Our outside consultant, Sandy Mathis, who's had extensive experience with IDAs and site development. And also counsel to the Advanced Albany County Alliance, Tom Owens. Basically what's, I think I might have mentioned this property to the board in the past in some of my updates. It's our belief that the Altech Steel site is the single best industrial site that we have in Albany County. It is, of course, the home to the former Altech Steel plant, which was closed in 87, thank you. But used to employ, 10,000 people in its heyday, and, next to the Waterloo Arsenal, kind of sort of, that all came undone, and the site has been, is now in foreclosure. It's actually in lieu of foreclosure with the county. The county did not, in fact, we closed on it because it was a Superfund site as designated by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And over the last 2 years, we've had negotiations with the Department of Environmental Conservation to get a liability agreement, which means that as if and when the project gets transferred to the Alliance, we would not be responsible for any of the existing environmental contamination on the site. Big issue. This property is undevelopable and unsaleable without that, because as many of you know from your private business activities, if you own a piece of property and it turns out to be environmentally contaminated, you are responsible for it, whether it was contaminated by you or under your ownership or not. So we successfully negotiated with the help of Tom and our outside counsel, Summers and Young, a liability agreement which limits any liability that the corporation would have going forward, and makes the site eligible for the so-called brownfield tax credit program, which is a very lucrative fundable tax credit to induce developers, or as they call them, volunteers, into coming into the project and doing the site preparation work, which would include some additional further remediation, but the developer would get a triple tax credit for that particular type of remediation. The problem arose as we came down here is that the Alliance, being a nonprofit LDC, is not by statute exempt from local property taxes. So we had entered into some discussions with the town of Colony, and they just got bogged down because there's no way that the Alliance or any of us could take this property and pay property taxes on it while it's being, made ready to be redeveloped. It can't even be redeveloped right now, but we have to take title to it to be able to make it ready for redevelopment. It'll become so-called shovel ready. Actually our consultant and our attorneys recommend that as if it was a property held by the IDA, it is by statute property tax exempt. So it just takes the whole problem away, and since we're all, kind of working in the same, direction based on the county's economic strategy and the whole one-stop shop, what we are asking consideration from the board here is to accept the transfer of this property from the county in lieu of foreclosure process, and it would be a property of the IDA. One other side note here is that Clayton has put out an RFP, and we've chosen a consultant, which we have not announced publicly yet, so I'd rather not mention that, to do what they call a generic environmental impact statement. Marlene, you may remember this. This is what the Carver companies did down at the Port of Queens, and means that you go through this, you identify the most intensive use that the site could possibly support, and you try to mitigate all the impacts of that, and then you have a truly shovel-ready site. And by that I mean that we could get somebody in here and start construction within 6 months or less. This is a ways off. There's still some work that needs to be done on this. But with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Tom and to Clayton to kind of go into some of the details of what this is about. And Chairman Paparian has also asked that we prepare a pro forma of the carrying costs on this, which we are in the process of doing. We've done a preliminary one, which Clayton can talk about, but we will be doing a much more fleshed out one. But the good part about this is we have sources of funding to pay for those carrying costs. Ironically, we have a set aside in the Altech Trust Fund, separate entity, of $1 million for exactly purposes like this, and that's what we're using to pay this consultant with, and we can use to pay for some of the carrying costs. We've also had fairly extensive conversations with ESD, Empire State Development, a gentleman by the name of Dave Whipple, who runs the so-called FAST New York program, and I'm not sure what FAST even stands for, but it's basically the shovel-ready grant program. Again, Queens received a $17 million award from the grant from the ESD to provide power to the Port of Queens to accommodate, some of the projects that they're entertaining down there. So with that, if there are no questions on any of that stuff, I'll turn it over to Tom and Clayton to kind of explain a little bit about what the transaction might look like. This is I suspect, this is going to take us at least a year before we're ready to really even bring it to the, I think. But it's worth the time spent. This is a site that has potentially all the power, water, sewer, rail, that you could possibly need for a heavy manufacturing operation.
Then we get some comments from Tom
Yeah.
and Clayton, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Right.
Sure, thank you, everybody. I'm Tom Owens again. Nice to meet everybody. So as Kevin, I think, succinctly summarized, it's in Chris's resolution logically laid out. There's two tax parcels. The Alliance looked at acquiring these properties about a year and a half ago. That was when we started the process, and we engaged with DEC with Dean Summer helped us, and we went right to the sort of the head office at DEC. They were very agreeable. We worked out, to people who have more experience than I, a pretty broad release of liability for environmental liability. And Chris will be looking at that more detailed and can advise you more directly on that. But as Kevin said, it basically provides release from the state for environmental contamination that existed when the title is obtained. And then also provides basically a minimum amount of what we would call prudent operator management, like keep the site secure. As long as we don't, as DEC sort of stated in some emails, not in the agreement, as long as the Alliance did not do something active that was not smart. For example, if you started digging in the ground without anybody's permission or operating backgrounds, things like this, then the MOU is designed to basically shield the Alliance from that property. One thing we're beginning to work on is to get that MOU, if this board chooses to move forward, to get it assigned to the IDA, because obviously whoever takes the title to it is going to want those same protections. So that's the environmental issue. And as Kevin laid out, as a non-for-profit, the Alliance would have to apply each year to the town of Colony for an exemption. We do that with other properties, and we're successful. In this instance, I think we started with very, optimistic conversations with the town. And, we submitted those for their review and comment, and they had a 180 on that, which again, that's in their discretion. That's the town assessors, the tax assessors' discretion to either approve or deny. And we learned pretty quickly after the initial optimism that was not going to be possible for the Alliance to get that. And the taxes were somewhere about 140 a year. So they're not small. They're, again, 58 acres total, as Chris lays out, 2 tax parcels. And as Kevin discussed, the county currently has a judgment in its hands for foreclosure. So the county has gone through foreclosure, but they don't take title. They wait, and particularly with these environmental contaminated parties, their preference from the county's perspective is to basically find another party, whether it's the Alliance or the IDA or a private party, and assign their right to enforce the judgment. So that's how they do it. They would allow some other party to basically become the owner of the county judgment, and then that allows the tax official in the county, Dave Riley, to basically execute a deed to whoever owns that judgment. And in that case, it would be whoever took the judgment. The Alliance was going to, but we're not at this point. It just doesn't make sense. So it would be the IDA on this. If this board choose to move forward, that's how it would happen.
And Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but the county most recently paid the tax, correct? So it hasn't been a third party. The county actually paid it. So, that seems to counter,
It's in Albany County, and I understand that this is not true in all counties, but if a property goes into foreclosure, tax foreclosure, the county steps in and makes the municipality whole on the property taxes. For some, I don't know if it's in perpetuity or for some period of time.
Well, what the county does is at the end of the collection period, they will make the municipality in Albany County whole. But then the county, in return for that, gets
The lien.
the lien, so to speak. They get to carry that forward. So that's the bargain between the county and the municipalities. And that's what occurs here on this process. So we would still need to work out, and we were able to with the county, and I imagine the IDA, Chris and I can do this with the county to make sure their balance that they're carrying, they've already paid the town and the school district. So they're satisfied, but the balance that the county continues to hold, if anybody were to take this property other than something like an IDA or an alliance, they might be looking to collect on that. We'd have to work that out with the county to make sure that's not something the IDA would be subject to.
One other question that I had, I guess, it relates to, you were getting some consultants or some type of an analysis to be prepared for the alliance. Would that also get assigned to the IDA? How does that, does it matter? How does that, gonna work? And as far as the outtake funds that come in for reimbursement, does it matter if it's the alliance or it's the IDA, since the IDA is the holder, to who's paying those carrying costs? How does that work?
This has never been done on that, but I think we would do it as we would, well, actually, we've been paying the costs for the Altech steel site out of the Altech trust fund
Yes,
already, right?
we do a quarterly voucher
Yeah,
to
so
reimburse.
it's just a kind of an internal voucher.
Okay.
So there wouldn't be any liability that would be accruing to the IDA that was unreimbursed.
Okay, all right. Sorry, didn't know that. So-
No.
The only other thing that Kevin mentioned, certain funding sources to supplement what we do, and that also includes National Grid has programs that would help us develop the transformer and the substation development that we need to bring in all that wonderful power onto the site. And then there's a number of other ESD programs that we can tap into.
And Sandy, what is the new power program, and what do they call it?
Power Up, I think is.
Power Up.
Power Up. Another 250 million, something that range to help with power enhancements.
On certain sites.
Economic development side.
Which this would be a prime.
On top of FAST, because FAST can be used for that as well.
Very good.
So that's the project. Listen, I know that this is a big undertaking, this is, we're asking you to take control of a Superfund site. But, we've spent a lot of time, money and effort on this and with the outside consultants and lawyers. And, we're recommending this to you because we do believe this to be one of the best industrial sites in the county.
Provided, we have proper insurance, whatever, you deem, as the CEO of the Alliance, acceptable. We have funds sort of allocated to carrying costs, try to mitigate our risk as best. I mean, we're in the business of economic development, right? So, this seems like a, good strategy, to sort of move forward and we can have control and take this project and eventually get it on the tax rolls and, get some employment over there. So, I guess with that, I'll open it up and Wanda.
Any prospects?
Yeah, actually, there are. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be ready to, we have one very significant prospect, European based manufacturer looking to build a 400,000 square foot manufacturing facility. Kevin and Clayton have showed them the site. They like it, but they want to move a little quicker than we're going to be able to. The site, I don't believe the site will be ready to meet their time frame. I think they were looking to get 2027, I think.
Yeah, next year they'd like to be in the ground, at least be in the ground.
So, but yeah, Marty, good question. That there is interest. We've also showed it to some representatives of the semiconductor supply chain companies, Again, they like it, it's, it's a clean site. Surface of the site's clean anyway. I should mention that, one of the conditions of our agreement with DEC is that we cap the site. So they've made a determination, I think, Tom, I don't want to get too far out over my skis here, but they've made a determination that they believe that it's better for the environment to leave the contaminations that are in the ground, and cap the site as opposed to trying to, excavate and mitigate them. It would be more, because they have some heavy metals and other things in the ground that are, better just left where they are. So as the site gets developed, we would very likely probably have to have monitoring wells, and during any construction, we would have to undertake certain practices to keep this down. Tom has had a little experience on this in the Mohawk Harbor project. Was that a Superfund site, Tom?
Brownfield.
A brownfield
State
site.
brownfield.
A state brownfield site. So, this is done, and there are developers who specialize in this. And the last thing that I'd like to add for this is, I think, and Sandy has been a great advisor on this, I think we can make some real money on the site. The IDA, listen, we're going to get our expenses paid for through public support, and we're not gonna give this property away, we're gonna lease or sell this, and that money will come back to the IDA.
That's gonna be my question, actually. So who owns title today before the foreclosure gets executed?
Yeah, it's Real Property Co. LLC.
So some
it's-
LLC.
It's the entity that has owned it, I think, since 2000.
Okay,
Yeah.
so structurally, IDA takes title with the details already described, and then at some point, if we were to sell it, let's say 5 or 4 years from now, after power and everything's in place, you're saying, would we have to pay back the county for the support? Like, what would be the arrangement with the county if the county's paying the town taxes? Is there any other parties needing to recoup the support?
Tom, I
I
don't
don't think so, right?
I mean, we were not in the original agreement when we thought we would take it. They
Understood.
were gonna wipe the taxes out. They were
Yeah.
not gonna be an IOU.
But right now, the county has paid what I heard, the town taxes.
Yeah, they've been paying for about 15.
Yeah.
They've been paying for like 15.
Sure.
So is that gonna continue during the IDA's ownership?
No, because once title hits the IDA, you're exactly real property tax.
So it's
You're done.
One of the reasons why they're doing it.
understood, but I'm just, okay.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Good question, though. There's no clawback, if you
There's
will,
No.
going back.
No,
to-
but we'll wanna make sure,
Right.
make sure that what exists today
Yes.
is wiped out.
Is wiped out,
Yes.
and that the
And
county,
that's not-
both from the county and the town perspective too, that there's no clawbacks.
Well, the county makes everybody whole.
I'm sorry.
The county makes everybody whole when taxes aren't paid.
That's
So the
correct.
county's the one that's been paying this for how many years?
Correct. I would 15, it's a long time. They
Okay, so
foreclosed.
you're telling me the county's, if we sell this property at some point, the county's not gonna get anything back for the taxes they paid?
Correct.
That was the original agreement, and now we're going to bring it over.
That's me.
The way, the justification is that as we develop this site will come back on the tax rolls and, as an improved property will generate taxes to the municipality as well as the county. And, the money that, if, whatever money we generate in selling the property can be used by the IDA to do this in other locations. The idea here is to kind of, build up a little bit of a fund to continue to do this kind of stuff, because there is, a little bit of a dearth of shovel-ready sites in our county. We're not bad, we've got some, Port of Freeman's, Vista, Port of Albany, some others, but we need to really work on our so-called shovel-ready sites, because if I tell somebody, yeah, I've got a site, but it'll take you 18 to 24 months, we're done. We don't get out of the gate. The other states are just so much farther along. And, you know, we just, one of the offshore wind manufacturers that we were talking to for the port of Queens just announced that they're going to be building in Virginia. A Korean cable manufacturer. That is something like a $400 or $600 million plant that they're going to be building down in Virginia. That we were looking at Albany, but I don't think that was the reason. They needed, this is a privately held Korean company, and they needed to own the property that they develop. And neither the Port of Albany nor the Port of Queens would sell the property outright. They're just not their business models.
And any sale down the road would be subject to appraisal, right, arm's length, you know. all the
Yes.
other-
I believe, I don't know, Tom, is that a requirement, Chris?
Yes.
If we dispose of any property, we have to do, by law, we have to do an appraisal?
Correct. As a public authority, you need to do it. Yes, sir.
But a benefit to the county is they don't need to keep making the town whole once the transfer occurs.
Right.
So that's a good,
They stopped paying the tax.
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
they don't have to do it anymore.
Right.
It's the IDA owns it.
Yep.
Correct?
so that's an immediate, or whenever.
Stop the bleeding.
Stop the bleeding, right.
Yep.
So
Kevin, take you to a nice lunch at least.
That's right. That's a good deal.
Any other questions?
I'd like to try to understand this liability waiver a little bit better. If there is cleanup costs, which there will be, who bears those cleanup costs? How do they?
We don't have,
We're
there's no
shielded from
affirmative
that.
obligation for the Alliance, at least in its MOU, to take any actions other than to not disturb it, basically, Bill. The DEC has spent how many millions already?
17 to $20 million over the last
Yeah.
27 years.
And they're continuing to execute, because that's their requirement. So they will continue to come on site and continue the cleanup plan that they've been executing for 7 or 8
So
years.
DEC is the one that's gonna be on the
Yeah,
hook
but
for the cost.
the idea would be, hopefully, you would find a private party, a developer that would,
Skylar, you know, Harry.
be able to, and their preferred remedy, as Kevin has talked about, is to cap it. That's not a requirement, but we know that's their preferred remedy because of the type of contaminants there. Basically, 2 feet of clean fill is what they've stated, and that's common. That's what we did at Mohawk Harbor and that sort of thing.
So the developer would
So the
typically pick up
developer
the
would
forward
usually-
cost from whatever drop-off point there is.
They would then undertake the idea to develop a site management plan, which would include probably DEC's remedy of the site. I mean, you're never sure until the developer gets that approved.
And they would work through getting tax credits or
Yeah,
whatever it is
brownfield
for doing
tax
that.
credit development.
Right, those fees that they pay for remediation would be eligible for certain amounts of tax credits.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And DEC, would there be legal documents from DEC waiving any future liability if the developer complies with the plan DEC?
With the
laid out?
site
With the
management
site
plan.
management.
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah,
Okay.
what you get is called a certificate of completion at the end of the
Okay,
remediation. It's not a clean slate, believe me, totally. I mean, you still have to operate it in accordance with the. site
within
management
accordance, they
plan.
can't in the future go drill something and
Yeah.
disturb,
Yeah.
understood.
And anytime you dig in the ground, you gotta have an excavation work plan that the regional DEC office has to
Sure.
scrutinize and approve. You can't use groundwater, you can't, I mean, but again, as long as it's public facilities, you're not tapping wells, you're not
Exactly.
having septic, usually it's workable.
Right.
This type of site.
And Chris, would your firm be the point as far as on closing, or how does that, you know, were we using?
It's a good question. I don't, I assume that maybe, you know, Tom would, again, this is so close, Tom would represent, well, no, the Alliance or who?
The Alliance really doesn't have much in it.
That's right.
We can certainly work with Chris to get it done. I think that's the idea. I mean, I can transfer that knowledge in about 7 minutes and then he can run with it. But the MOU is with us, with the Alliance right now, so we would assist. And we've already started that conversation with
Right.
DEC.
Okay.
Dean Summer has already reached out. And my understanding is they're gonna be amenable if the IDA chose to do this.
Has this been done before where an IDA takes ownership? I just wanted curious about potential future litigation if someone says, nope, you went down a road that shouldn't happen. Like, are we trying to create something new, or is this, I'm not trying to overcome.
Answer this more
Yeah,
demonstrably.
A lot of our IDA clients own property.
Okay.
I'm not sure that the Superfund site, this one would be a new one in my book. I don't know if Joe Scott ever did that, but
We owned Exchange Street, right?
Yeah.
A few years back, but it wasn't, it wasn't, this type of property, it was more of a.
but I think the key is
Open first project.
if the indemnification, the MOU gets assigned to the IDA as part of this process, which we already, by the sound of that's certainly gonna happen, then we're protected as much as we can.
Okay.
Now, in the private sector, one would probably set up an LLC underneath the main company. Is that the strategy here that could be used, or, if you feel that,
Well, I always worry about setting up any kind of affiliate of the IDA, because then the ABO comes calling and says, oh, you need a new separate Paris filing for that. I don't think we need a separate LLC for this one. I think it would be all right holding it. But
that's,
something to think about.
opinion, it's fine,
Yeah.
just, we see it in the private sector all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Tends to be one of the isolators to keep it separate in the state. Okay, any other questions?
So the resolution before you, there's basically two parts. The first is the IDA board finds that this action is an unlisted action, the acceptance of title to the property by the IDA eventually. Since it's an unlisted action, we can do an uncoordinated review. We don't need to notify any other agencies that you would have to send them notice of the project, the secret process. So there's no notice period required. We can just make our own determination like the prior resolutions we discussed. There's a negative declaration that the IDA says will not have a significant effect on the environment, the project that is. That's Exhibit A. And the only other item I want to point out is in Section 4. It has some conditions for the IDA taking title of this property. I mean, we tried to kitchen sink this as much as possible. If you look at Section 4, it's subject to the assignment of the NYSDEC agreement. That's the MOU document that Tom referenced. We would like to do a lien search just to make sure that everything is clear from a title perspective. And Tom mentioned this, and I believe Kevin did as well, having adequate levels of insurance on the property, which of course the IDA would. So those are kind of the conditions that we thought of that we should think about making in this resolution. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, I think, at least from my perspective, you answered the questions. Anyone else before we take this to a vote? Okay, then can I get a motion to move this item?
I'll move it.
Can we get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we so move it. So there's a second part to this, you indicated, or is that?
Those were the two proposals, Chair.
So-
Yep.
Okay, very good. Item 7 here. Public comments, open discussion. Anybody have anything you'd like to talk about?
Can't help it.
Okay, I guess not. Okay. You don't have to go into executive, we ain't got nothing to cover here. Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to see you. That was good.
We all here?
Marlene, can you sign stuff?